I stood at the edge of the vast sea, my breath shallow, my heart pounding like a war drum against my chest. Behind me, the thunderous roar of chariot wheels grew louder, a terrifying symphony of impending doom. The air was thick with fear, the cries of thousands of Israelites rising in desperation. Their eyes, wide with terror, turned to me, pleading for answers I did not have. I was their leader, their chosen guide, yet in that moment I felt as lost as they did. How could we possibly escape? Trapped between an unforgiving sea and the ruthless army of Pharaoh, it seemed as though our journey to freedom had come to a devastating end. But then, as the first Egyptian soldiers emerged on the horizon, glinting like death beneath the desert sun, something within me stirred. A presence, stronger than fear, deeper than doubt, filled my soul, urging me forward. I did not understand it, but I obeyed. With trembling hands, I lifted my staff over the waters, surrendering to a power far greater than my own. What happened next defied all logic, shattered the very laws of nature, and forever changed the course of history. My name is Moses, and my story is one of the most incredible and well-known in the Bible. I was instructed by God to lead my people out of Egypt, and it's on that journey that our story begins. Expect some twists and turns on this journey, climaxing in an incredible miracle, only made possible by God. So let's go back in time and see how this story plays out. As we journeyed away from Egypt, a sense of elation filled the air, a feeling unlike anything we had ever known. For centuries, our people had groaned under the weight of slavery, our cries for deliverance echoing in the heavens. And now, at long last, we were free. The heavy chains of oppression had been shattered, the cruel lashes of our taskmasters silenced. Each step forward felt like a step into destiny, into a future brimming with possibility. The road ahead stretched vast and unknown, yet it was ours to walk, no longer as slaves, but as a people chosen and led by the Almighty Himself. I looked around and saw joy written on the faces of our people. Their eyes, once dulled by suffering, now sparkled with newfound hope. Children laughed, their little feet kicking up the desert dust as they ran ahead, unburdened by the past. Women embraced one another, tears of gratitude streaming down their sun-kissed cheeks. Fathers lifted their sons onto their shoulders, their voices filled with song. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered celebration, a moment that would be etched into our hearts for generations. The weight of oppression that had shackled us for so long seemed to lift with every breath we took, every step away from the land of our bondage. But our joy was fleeting. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, a faint vibration beneath our feet, a distant rumbling carried on the desert wind. At first, it was easy to dismiss, a mere trick of the mind. But soon, heads began to turn. Eyes narrowed in confusion. The ground trembled ever so slightly, and then, on the horizon, a shadow began to rise. A cloud of dust, thick and ominous. My stomach twisted into knots as realization dawned upon me. I had seen this before. It was the dust of marching feet, the storm of approaching war. Pharaoh had changed his mind. The murmur of concern among our people quickly turned to cries of terror. The dust cloud grew larger, surging forward like an unstoppable tide. The sound of hooves pounding against the earth reached our ears, followed by the clatter of iron, the clash of shields, the unmistakable battle cries of warriors preparing for slaughter. I could make out the gleam of polished bronze chariots, the glint of drawn swords, the deadly precision of archers mounted and ready to strike. Pharaoh had not sent mere pursuers, he had sent his entire army. The might of Egypt, the most formidable force in the known world, was bearing down upon us with ruthless speed. Panic spread like wildfire. Women clutched their children to their chests, shielding them with trembling hands. The elderly stumbled as they tried to quicken their steps. Some men reached for makeshift weapons, wooden staffs, stones, futile defenses against the armored warriors who chased us. Fear strangled the joy that had only moments ago filled the air. The songs of freedom were silenced by cries of despair. Then came the accusations. Why have you brought us out here to die in the wilderness? Did you lead us out of Egypt only to be slaughtered like animals? Were there not enough graves in Egypt that we had to perish in this wasteland? Their voices rose in anger and terror, each word striking me like a hammer against my soul. I had heard these voices before, in the depths of my own self-doubt, in the lonely moments when I questioned whether I was truly the man for this task. Had I misunderstood God's plan? Had I led my people not into freedom, but into doom? I turned my eyes forward. Before us stretched the sea, vast and impassable. Behind us, Pharaoh's army advanced with terrifying speed. The two forces, the merciless soldiers of Egypt and the endless waters, closed in on us like the jaws of a trap. My heart pounded, my mind raced. There was no way forward, no way back, no escape. And then, in the midst of the chaos, I felt it. That same presence I had known in the solitude of the wilderness, that same voice that had spoken to me from the burning bush. It was steady, unwavering, a quiet power that drowned out the fear around me. It was as if an unseen hand rested upon my shoulder, grounding me, reminding me of who I was, of who he was. I took a deep breath and turned to the panicked Israelites, raising my voice above the clamor. "Do not be afraid," I called out, my words firm, unwavering. "Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." My words hung in the air, a challenge to their fear, a call to faith. I did not know how God would save us. I did not know what miracle lay ahead. But I knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he had not brought us this far to abandon us now. The sea, the army, the impossible odds, none of it mattered in the face of the Almighty. Something was coming. I could feel it. The weight of thousands of lives pressed down on my shoulders as I stood at the water's edge, caught between the vast, impassable depths of the sea and the glinting steel of Pharaoh's advancing army. Their war cries grew louder, the deafening rumble of hooves shaking the very earth beneath us. There was no escape, no refuge, no time. The impossible choice before me would determine the fate of an entire nation. The people I had led to freedom, the people who had rejoiced only days before, now trembled in terror, their faces pale with dread. I felt the coarse sand shift beneath my feet, the sharp gusts of salty wind whipping against my skin. The air was thick with fear, the bitter scent of desperation mingling with the tang of the sea. My heart pounded, not just from the looming threat, but from the suffocating burden of responsibility. In my hands, I clutched the staff, once a conduit of divine power, now nothing more than a simple piece of wood in the face of an impending slaughter. Doubt coiled in my mind like a serpent, hissing lies, poisoning my confidence. There is no escape. The miracles were an illusion. You have led them to their deaths. I swallowed hard, forcing my eyes forward. The sea stretched endlessly before us, its waves mocking me with their impenetrable vastness. Behind us, the growing dust cloud of Pharaoh's chariots signaled our doom. My mind raced, searching for an answer, a hidden path, some way to undo the perilous trap we had stumbled into. But there was nothing, no plan, no solution. I turned, my eyes scanning the crowd. Mothers clutched their children, shielding them with shaking arms. Fathers stood in tense silence, gripping makeshift weapons they knew would be useless. The elderly sat on the ground, resigned to fate, their weary eyes reflecting the history of a people who had known only suffering. And then the cries began, accusations wrapped in terror. "Why have you brought us here to die? Did you lead us from slavery only to be slaughtered in the wilderness? We should have stayed in Egypt." The words stung, each one like a lash against my spirit. I had heard these voices before, not from them but from within myself. Had I misunderstood God's call? Had I mistaken his promise? Had I, in my arrogance, doomed my own people? I closed my eyes and turned my heart inward, desperately reaching for the presence I had once felt so clearly. The memories of miracles past, the Nile turning to blood, the darkness that fell over Egypt, the Passover night, felt distant now, like echoes lost in the winds of time. "Lord," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the crashing waves. You brought us this far. You promised to deliver us. But I am just a man. How can I stand against an army? How can I part a sea? The contrast between my own mortal frailty and the desperate need for divine intervention had never been starker. I felt small, weak, utterly incapable in the face of such overwhelming odds. But even as my fear threatened to consume me, something else stirred within. A stillness, presence. It was not loud, not thunderous, not a spectacle like the burning bush. It was something deeper, a whisper, a remembrance. The same voice that had spoken to me in the wilderness, the voice that had called me by name and sent me before Pharaoh, now spoke again, not with new instructions, but with a simple truth. I am with you. And suddenly I understood. This was never about my strength. It was never about my ability. It was about trust, about faith, about the unwavering power of the Almighty who had never failed his people, who would not fail them now. The pounding of hooves grew louder. The sound of Egyptian war horns split the sky. Time had run out. I turned to face my people, their wide, terrified eyes searching mine for an answer, for a miracle. Stand firm, I called out, my voice rising with authority I did not know I possessed. Do not be afraid. You need only to be still, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord. The words rang out over the crowd, silencing their cries. A hush fell upon them, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. But in my heart, there was no more doubt. With renewed purpose, I lifted my staff high above my head. The wood, weathered and worn, no longer felt like a burden but an extension of God's own hand. I stretched it out over the sea, the wind howling around me as if the very air itself awaited his command. And in that moment, I fully expected the impossible to unfold before our eyes. The sea before us had always been an impassable barrier, a vast and merciless divide between slavery and freedom. But as I held my staff aloft, something within me stirred, a certainty beyond logic, beyond fear. We were about to witness a miracle, one so profound that it would be retold for generations. Yet, how does one prepare to walk through the heart of the sea itself? A sudden roar filled the air, a sound unlike any I had ever heard. It was neither wind nor wave, but something greater, something divine. Before our very eyes, the impossible unfolded. The sea, mighty and unrelenting, split apart, heaving itself into towering walls of water on either side. The seabed stretched before us, bare and open like the path of destiny itself. A collective gasp rippled through our people, their disbelief mixing with awe. Even I, who had called upon the power of the Almighty, felt my breath catch in my throat. The ground before us, once hidden beneath the depths, shimmered with moisture, a landscape never before touched by human feet. It was otherworldly, dotted with scattered seashells and smooth, glistening stones. Pools of water shimmered in the dim light, reflecting the spectacle around us. Small fish flopped in confusion, displaced from their home, while larger creatures, trapped within the towering walls of water, twisted and turned as if suspended in time. The scent of salt and seaweed filled the air, mingling with the sharp tang of the wind that now rushed through the corridor of dry land. I took the first step, my foot sinking slightly into the damp sand. The coolness of it sent a shiver through me, not from the chill, but from the sheer magnitude of the moment. Each step forward was a step deeper into faith, into trust. Behind me, I heard murmurs, voices wavering between fear and wonder. Then, slowly, the people followed. At first, their steps were hesitant, careful. Mothers clutched their children tightly, their eyes darting nervously at the walls of water towering above us. Fathers shielded their families, watching for any sign that the miracle would falter. The elderly moved cautiously, some leaning on the arms of younger relatives, their faces lined with a mixture of exhaustion and astonishment. As we walked, the silence was eerie. The sea, which had once roared with unrelenting force, was now hushed, held at bay by a power beyond comprehension. The only sounds were our footsteps, the occasional cry of a child, and the faint rippling of the water walls that loomed over us. The air was thick with mist, a fine spray clinging to our skin, a constant reminder of the vast waters being held back by an unseen hand. The seabed beneath us varied as we moved forward. Some areas were firm, packed down as though prepared just for our feet, while other sections were soft, causing us to sink slightly with each step. Seaweed clung to our ankles, remnants of an underwater world now laid bare. Shells crunched beneath our feet, scattered like forgotten relics of a time before miracles. Children, once fearful, began to marvel at the sight around them. Some reached out hesitant hands, as if expecting the watery walls to ripple at their touch. They pointed excitedly at the fish frozen mid-swim, their laughter brief, hesitant at first, breaking through the heavy silence. Some even stooped to collect shells, stuffing them into the folds of their tunics as if carrying a piece of the miracle with them. The sky above was a strange, shifting mixture of light and shadow. Dark clouds loomed in the distance, yet rays of sunlight broke through in places, casting ethereal beams upon our path. It felt as though heaven itself watched in silent witness to our journey. The wind howled through the corridor of water, whipping through our garments, pushing us forward as though the very breath of God was urging us on. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Each step felt weighty not just in distance but in meaning. We were walking through the impossible, through something no human had ever experienced before. And yet, with every step, our fear lessened, replaced by something new. An unshakable belief that we were meant to be here, that this path had been made just for us. Finally, as the far shore came into view, a collective sigh of relief rippled through our people. The impossible was behind us, and freedom lay ahead. One by one, families rushed onto the solid ground, their bodies trembling from exhaustion, from adrenaline, from sheer awe. Some fell to their knees in worship, others clung to loved ones, whispering words of gratitude and wonder. But our moment of triumph was fleeting. A low, ominous rumble reached my ears, sending a chill down my spine. I turned back toward the path we had just crossed, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Pharaoh's army had entered the sea. Their chariots thundered across the exposed seabed, their soldiers charging forward with ruthless precision. Their shouts echoed between the walls of water, their armor glinting beneath the filtered light. They came in full force, determined, relentless. The might of Egypt had followed us into the very heart of the miracle itself. For a moment, fear threatened to grip me once more. But as I stood at the edge of our crossing, watching the enemy draw nearer, a deep calm settled over me. Because I knew, just as surely as I knew that God had made a way for us, this same path would not be their salvation. The sea had granted us passage, but it would not be so kind to those who sought to undo God's will. The end of our journey was the beginning of theirs, and their fate was already sealed. All I had to do was wait. I stood at the far shore, my breath steady despite the chaos unfolding before me. The last of our people had crossed, their bodies shaking with exhaustion, their eyes wide with disbelief. We had made it. Against all odds, through the depths of the sea itself, we had emerged on the other side. But the work of the Almighty was not yet finished. Before me, the path we had walked moments ago was now filled with the thunder of Pharaoh's army. His chariots raced forward, his soldiers pressing on, driven by fury and arrogance. The golden armor of Egypt gleamed in the dim light, their weapons drawn, their war cries filling the corridor of water. They charged without hesitation, believing they too would pass through this miraculous pathway unscathed. They did not understand. I gripped my staff, my fingers tightening around the weathered wood. My heart was calm, though I knew the next moments would change everything. The Lord had made a way for us, but he had not promised the same for our enemies. I lifted my gaze to the towering walls of water, still frozen in place, held there by a force unseen yet undeniable. The wind that had rushed through the corridor, guiding us forward, had begun to shift. It was no longer a wind of passage, but of warning. Then it happened. A single chariot wheel wrenched free from its axle, its rider flung into the sand. A soldier cried out, his voice swallowed by the roar of something greater. Another chariot lurched, its wheels sinking into the seabed, the firm path turning to thick, unyielding mud beneath their feet. Panic rippled through their ranks. Horses reared and whinnied, their hooves slipping as they tried to move forward. The might of Egypt, the unstoppable force that had enslaved us for centuries, was suddenly fragile, broken by forces they could not comprehend. Confusion turned to fear. "Let us flee from the Israelites," a soldier screamed, his voice laced with terror. "The Lord fights for them against Egypt." And then the command came not from me but from the heavens. I felt the weight of divine instruction settle in my spirit. It was time. I lifted my staff once more, this time not to part the waters, but to release them. With one sweeping motion, I stretched my hand over the sea. The roar that followed was unlike anything I had ever heard, a sound of immense power, of finality, of judgment. The walls of water, which had stood impossibly still for so long, heaved forward with unstoppable force. They collapsed upon themselves, crashing down upon Pharaoh's army like the hand of God himself. Chariots splintered, soldiers were swallowed whole. The gleaming weapons of Egypt disappeared beneath the waves. The cries of the pursuing army were drowned in the torrent, their voices vanishing into the deep as swiftly as they had come. And then silence. The sea, once parted, was whole again. It stretched before us as it always had, vast, endless, impassable. The path we had taken no longer existed. The army that had pursued us was gone, lost beneath the waters. The power of Egypt had been buried beneath the very sea it had dared to cross. I turned to my people. For a moment no one spoke. Thousands stood frozen in place, their minds trying to grasp what they had just witnessed. Some clutched their loved ones, their hands trembling. Others stared at the sea, waiting, as if expecting Pharaoh's forces to rise again. But they would not. The threat that had loomed over us for generations was no more. And then, a single voice broke the silence. A cry of joy, of awe. Another followed, and then another. The sound grew, swelling into a mighty chorus of praise. Tears streamed down the faces of the people as they fell to their knees, lifting their hands toward the heavens. Their cries of fear had turned to songs of deliverance. Miriam, my sister, stepped forward, her face radiant with joy. She raised her tambourine high, her voice ringing through the air like the sound of freedom itself. "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea." The people took up the song, their voices rising in unison, their burdens finally lifted. The sun, once hidden behind dark clouds, broke through the sky, bathing us in golden light. I closed my eyes, breathing in the moment. The road ahead would not be easy. The wilderness stretched before us, unknown and untamed. There would be trials, hardships, moments of doubt. But this was a beginning. God had delivered us. We were no longer slaves. We were free. My name is Moses, and this was my story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. May God bless you and your family.